pace of growth really slowing.
GDP is nowhere near where it was supposed to be.
Interest rates are expected to stay higher.
2024 has been a year the economy has been on life support.
The deepest hit to Australians' living standards on record.
Held up by government spending, migration and jobs.
The labour market just continues to deliver very solid employment gain.
Global economic uncertainty and higher interest rates is smashing household budgets and slowing our economy considerably.
Many Australians are doing it tough.
We think we remain on the narrow path.
We have now been in a household recession for 7 quarters.
Australians have enjoyed vastly differing fortunes.
Very uneven across different types of households.
Their interest payments have been going up, they've suffered very high inflation. So for those households, it's actually been a really tough year.
While the country is not in a technical recession, households are going backwards. But it's not been too bad for those who own their homes, benefit from high-interest savings accounts and booming asset prices.
We're seeing a concentration of economic activity and wealth gains in a smaller portion of households and businesses than in prior cycles.
In November 2023, the Reserve Bank hiked the cash rate to 4.35%, and it hasn't moved.
The thing is, though, that we can't expect massive cuts in rates. The neutral rate of interest, the cash rate, is just over 3% around most people's estimates.
Interest rates in Australia weren't particularly high for the economic conditions we've had, and so monetary policy in Australia hasn't been that restrictive.
The probability is the RBA will cut rates next year as inflation continues to moderate and the growth outlook is recovering but still soft.
Outside of the pandemic, the economy is growing at its slowest annual pace in decades, at 0.8% in the year to September. But what's kept rates static, even as central banks globally have started cutting, is our inflation rate. Prices are rising at 2.1% annually, which is the lowest pace of growth since inflation took off in mid-2021. But the central bank's preferred measure of underlying inflation, which excludes volatile items, is at 3.5%, outside the RBA's 2 to 3% target band.
Well, in 2024, we learned that inflation globally was not sticky for the long term, I suppose. And what we've seen is that inflation's actually come down in an orderly fashion.
The cost of services, like going to the dentist or hairdresser, is still high.
Aggregate demand in the economy has exceeded supply, and so that's why inflation's still been above the RBA's target.
Substantial relief for consumers has come from federal government subsidies on power bills, something that's expected to continue.
And that's going to help keep the headline inflation rate basically around where it is, just under 3% year on year.
Our jobs market has remained strong, with rising wages.
I don't think anyone expected it to do quite as well as it did.
Surprisingly resilient and better than expected by almost anyone's expectations a year ago.
The unemployment rate started the year at 3.9%, lifted marginally and ended there. Wages were growing at 4.3% annually as 2024 began, the highest rate since March 2009, but have now eased to 3.5%.
Businesses have basically been hoarding onto as many workers as possible.
Public sector employment has been ridiculously strong, and that's what's really kept the strength there.
Historically, we've actually seen that the unemployment rate doesn't actually peak until well after the cash rate starts being cut.
Despite concerns about low productivity growth, one of the biggest factors impacting the Australian economy is the health of our largest trading partner, China. Its construction sector has slumped, consumer spending is way down, and stimulus packages have failed to fire up the economy. Softening commodity prices for our exports to China, like iron ore.
The likelihood is that their growth rate will slow even more sharply in 2026, perhaps to something we haven't seen before, like a 3% growth rate.
The 47th President of the United States.
2025 marks the return of Donald Trump to the White House.
The main thing we can anticipate out of President Trump is a degree of volatility.
promising the mass deportation of migrant workers and threatening new trade barriers and tariffs.
We have to see whether the action matches the rhetoric, but certainly that would be bad for growth, both in the US and inflation.
I think we will get some increases to tariffs on China, but they won't be able to be to the same extent as what he's spoken about.
So, what's ahead? Our experts all expect light relief from interest rates and for unemployment to slowly rise. But that unevenness of how the economy is experienced to continue.
People's standard of living, how much income they feel they have, that hasn't been going forward. And so, that's the negative side of how the economy is performing.
And this divergence of trends is probably going to persist.
That patchwork economy, whether it's by state, whether it's by sector, we certainly see very different performances.
2025 brings challenges. As well as a new US president, the exploding power of artificial intelligence, a federal election, and more surprises.
I think it's going to be a slow grind.
Something Australians have gotten used to.